In 1993, this house in Vancouver sold for $350,000. Today, it's worth $2 million. That means your $20,000 down payment would have turned into $1.7 million. That is a lot of money for literally doing nothing. Now, let's do some math. Let's say I put $20,000 into that home in 1993. It would be worth $1.7 million. But if I took that $20,000 and put it into the S&P 500, it would be worth half of that. Now, this video isn't just about Vancouver. Vancouver is one of many cities around the world that has the exact same problem. Housing is too dang expensive. This is best captured by one chart. Home prices in the OECD have risen by 16% faster than incomes. In countries like America, Canada, and Australia, even more. But this video isn't just random numbers about how housing is expensive. It's about why and whether it can be fixed. I'm Cam from 2 and 20, and this is the 7 deadly sins of housing. Okay, let's level set for a second. We believe that housing problems are 100% solvable. But for cities like Vancouver, SF, or Sydney, they likely will never be solved. And that all starts with, arguably, the most powerful sin, the one that started it all. The belief that your single-family home is an investment. Now, I can already hear Graham Stephan typing in the comments, it is an investment. And he is partially right. So after World War II, the US was worried about returning to Great Depression-style instability. To avoid this, they created the GI Bill. This helped Americans secure low down payment mortgages to buy homes as a form of forced savings, but not for speculation. Countries like Canada had something similar with the introduction of government-backed mortgage insurance. And initially, this wasn't a bad idea. It helped force long-term savings among the population and helped strengthen communities. But you see, there's a fundamental problem with thinking of your house as an investment. Let's take a factory, for example. Unlike a factory, your house doesn't produce any products and it doesn't generate any profit. You sleep there, eat there, watch TV, and that's really it. A factory becomes more valuable when it sells more products and makes more profits. You following? But a house can't do that. So how do you make a house more valuable? Simple, the second sin. The foundational concept of economics is supply and demand. If demand increases but supply doesn't, then the price of the supply goes up. Pretty simple, right? Well, say hello to the second sin, restrictive zoning and its little brother, NIMBYism. So all cities have zoning. This basically tells you what you can and cannot build on any given parcel of land. SF was one of the first US cities to adopt a zoning code. Here's how it worked. They divided the city into first residential, which were homes for the rich, and second residential, everything else. The idea was really simple. By making it harder to build in first residential zones, you'd increase the value of homes and prevent racial minorities from moving into predominantly white neighborhoods. Sadly, this was one of the first case studies on how to effectively weaponize zoning. And the results were scary. In 2019, it was shown that 75% of SF's land was restricted to single-family homes or small duplexes. Vancouver was even worse, with 81% of the land reserved for single-family homes. And we can even see a similar pattern in all of these other cities too. NIMBYs will often cite issues of community character when fighting projects, but in reality, it is always a battle between the haves and the have-nots. And when densification does rear its ugly head and home prices begin to decline, homeowners introduce additional barriers. For example, the California Environmental Quality Act was passed to stop industrial pollution. A noble cause, right? But it was quickly weaponized by homeowners to block housing. Between 2018 and 2020, it was estimated that 60% of all CEQA lawsuits were filed against housing developments. In Vancouver, the city implemented view cones to preserve the views of the mountains. But what this does is it caps the height of buildings, which artificially lowers potential supply. And yeah, Vancouver has a beautiful skyline, but one study found that even slight modifications to the cones could unlock 30,000 potential homes over a few decades. And as more and more of these complex zoning laws comes into effect, home prices begin to rise and homeowners begin to complain because higher home prices equals more property taxes. In 2003, Warren Buffett was advising Arnold Schwarzenegger on his bid to become governor. Buffett gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal and he explained how property taxes were deeply flawed. So here's what he said. His $500,000 home in Omaha paid $14,401 in property taxes, while his $4 million California home paid only $2,264 in property taxes. Naturally, he thought this was unfair and kept home prices artificially high in California. So what he suggested was the repeal of Prop 13. Prop 13 capped property taxes at 1% of cash value at purchase, restricts annual increases to at most 2%, and requires a 2/3 majority in the legislature to repeal. In short, it's political suicide. Naturally, Arnold backed off of it, and Warren quietly left the campaign. This might be the most controversial sin: low taxes on housing. The father of modern economics, Adam Smith, argued in 1776 that a tax on land was the most perfect tax possible. The logic is simple. The value of the land has nothing to do with the skills or labor of the owner of the land. Therefore, it's appropriate to tax it. On the other hand, the factory worker must be productive to generate value, and therefore they should be taxed less. Many other economists and thinkers agree. Henry George, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and even the most fun house party guest, Milton Friedman, who called it the least bad tax. To show you what we mean, let's look at Australia and Canada. Cities like Vancouver, Sydney, and Melbourne have seriously high housing prices, but they each have seriously low property taxes. The average property tax on $1 million home in these cities is around $2,500 per year. Compare that to a more affordable city like Dallas, where the property tax bill is $19,000 per year. This isn't simply an anecdote, it's been studied ad nauseum. To prove our point, here are a number of studies on the relationship between property taxes and housing prices. And every one of them basically concludes the same thing. Higher property taxes increases affordability, especially for younger people. But here's the simple problem. Young people are not the majority voter. So politicians are left with one option: continue to keep property taxes low. But it doesn't end with property taxes. Now that homeowners have built up all this hard-earned equity, they don't want to pay taxes when they sell. God, no taxes! Why should they pay taxes for building up wealth for literally doing nothing? Let me explain. Places like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Norway, and others have no tax on the sale of primary homes. And often what happens is you can use this benefit unlimited times. Meaning you buy a home, it increases in value, you sell it, pay no taxes, buy another, it becomes your primary home, it increases in value, you sell it, pay no taxes, and so on and so on and so on. Let me show you how crazy this actually sounds. So if you work, you pay 30 to 50% of your wages in taxes. If you have a business, you pay 30% of your profits in taxes. And if you sell your business, you pay taxes on 50% of your gains. But if you sit on your butt on a piece of land that is now worth more than you can count, you pay $0 in taxes. Sounds like a fair system, right? And what this does is this tax system also has a ripple effect of making investment into productive business way less attractive, which slows down real economic growth, wage growth, and job growth. As you can see, you now have a number of issues that arise. Housing is becoming very expensive, and regular hardworking folks can no longer afford it. But the government doesn't want housing prices to come down because they'll lose their election, and at the same time, they need money to provide services because life is becoming unaffordable. But the government can't collect tax revenue from property. So what are they supposed to do? We'll get there in a second, but before we do, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Henson. So I shave every day, and for years I assumed that the razor marks or bumps on my skin was just something I had to accept, and I was frustrated, so I kept buying nicer cartridges and nicer razors and kept going up in price and price. But spoiler alert, none of it worked. You see, the problem is with the razor itself. Most razors are built with springs and pivots, so the blade flexes against your skin. That flex causes that irritation. The razor industry's response was to add more blades, then more lubrication strips, then vibrating handles, then $40 cartridges that last a month. And now the cartridge industry is a SaaS business, basically dressed up as a grooming product. Henson did the opposite. These guys are aerospace machinists, so they fixed the design. Listen to this. They machined the blade at a fixed angle to tolerances tighter than a human hair. Nothing flexes, nothing pivots. You don't even press. The weight of the handle does the work. I've been using mine for 18 months and honestly, my neck has been clear for the first time in so long. The razor lasts a lifetime, blades cost around 10 cents each, and when you compare that to the big boys at roughly $4 a cartridge, the razor pays for itself in about 3 months. I also use their Protect Shave Cream, and there's no sulfates, no dyes, no fancy things, just something to help you shave better and slicker. Use the link below with code 2and20 and Henson throws in a free 100 pack of blades, 2 years of shaving, free. And now back to the video. Sin 4, tax the workers. Dun, dun, dun. This sin sounds hyperbolic, but it's not. Since property taxes are super low, government needs a way to fund infrastructure in their ever-ballooning budgets. So the simple thing you can do is tax new housing. Wait, what? Listen, you might think this is crazy, and you would be right. But as cities struggle to fund projects and politicians fight to keep their seats, they are forced to tax renters and would-be owners instead of their constituents. In essence, politicians want to make sure that homeowners continue to hoard land but contribute as little as possible to the city. So, municipalities introduce development fees. And these fees are no laughing matter. Toronto's development charges add 20 to 25% to the cost of a home. In SF, impact fees can add up to 18%. And it's a similar story in Vancouver, Sydney, and LA. Now, city workers and politicians, who, may I remind you, likely failed grade 12 math, will tell you that, don't worry, the developers will simply eat these costs. But anyone with half a brain would tell you that this makes no sense. In fact, smart people who studied development fees discovered, not so shockingly, that these fees increase housing prices, whereas property taxes lower and stabilize housing prices. Again, for effect, here are a number of studies that conclude this, and we'll link these in the description so you can check them out later. The logic is simple. Land taxes encourage densification and reduce the ability for people to be house rich and cash poor. In essence, if property taxes are high, homeowners won't want their house to be worth millions because they will owe a ton in taxes. This means home prices don't outgrow wages because you need high wages to afford high property taxes. Whereas development charges basically make it harder for developers to get a return on their housing project. And as such, to make the numbers work, they have to pass the cost on to the workers, i.e. us. Okay, now we are getting really spicy, and home prices are going sky high, baby. So how the heck is anyone supposed to buy these homes? Now, this one might be controversial, but in select markets, this has likely been one of the biggest contributors to housing prices. We're talking about foreign buyers. Portugal is the prime example of this. In 2012, to recover from the Eurozone debt crisis, the government introduced a golden visa program for foreigners who invested 500k euros in Portuguese real estate. Good idea, right? This led to the purchase of billions of dollars worth of developments in Lisbon and Porto by rich foreigners. To make matters worse, the government introduced non-habitual resident status, which allowed high-value professionals and retirees to have reduced tax rates on pensions, dividends, and the like. The program was a great success. 17,700 investors purchased the visa and generated 7.5 billion euros of upfront investment, with real estate comprising 90% of it. On top of this, 100,000 people claimed NHR status, bringing with them high savings and incomes. Naturally, the government was ecstatic. The economy was growing, the rich were spending, but then they noticed something. Between 2013 and 2025, real estate prices grew 191%. During that same period, Portugal saw wages only rise 60%, meaning home prices increased at 3 times the rate of wages. But you see, Portugal isn't alone. For example, Vancouver saw a massive increase in real estate prices driven by foreign investment. And most Canadians are likely unaware of Canada's own golden visa. The province of Quebec runs a program called the Quebec Immigrant Investor Program. Here's how it works. Foreigners give Quebec an interest-free loan of about $1 million, and in return they receive PR status. But instead of living in Quebec, 90% of participants relocate elsewhere, with the vast majority of the 50,000 wealthy individuals settling in Vancouver and Richmond. London, Spain, and others have had similar issues. The argument for foreign investment is always simple. Rich foreigners will bring money, spend it locally, and stimulate the economy. But here's the thing, that is empirically wrong. Nearly every study we could find on the subject comes to the same conclusion. Yes, the economy will grow, but it is almost entirely driven by housing speculation and consumption. investment doesn't increase, wages are outstripped by asset prices, and Dutch disease can kick in, leading to a real estate pandemonium that crowds out other investment opportunities. And it makes perfect sense. If you let a bunch of rich people who made their money abroad come to your country, they inherently have an advantage over the local population. Secondly, these people are not interested in growing their wealth. They are interested in preserving it. This means plopping money into real estate and kicking back. And the proof is in the pudding. None of these cities mentioned have seen any meaningful improvements in anything but housing prices. But this leads to a knock-on effect. Because housing has exploded, construction and real estate adjacent industries become the dominant pillars of the economy. So if you are in government, how do you make sure to keep the Ponzi scheme going? The government has always had the best intentions, but often the worst execution. And it makes sense. The people who go into government are often trained in winning elections, not in thinking rationally. Canada is possibly the best example of this next sin. Daddy government. Canada has some of the lowest mortgage rates in the Western world, and most Canadians take this for granted and likely have no idea why this is. Through the National Housing Act, the government allows banks to sell their mortgages to investors. Sounds normal so far, right? But just wait. When these banks sell mortgages to investors, the government of Canada, via the CMHC, guarantees them. Meaning these mortgage-backed securities are no riskier than sovereign bonds. But there is more. The government, again through the CMHC, provides insurance that backstops the bank in case homeowners default on their mortgages. In a worst-case scenario, the government of Canada, moronically, would be on the hook for the majority of residential mortgage risk. Just imagine if the government guaranteed that Amazon's share price wouldn't go down, or that your friend's strawberry matcha focaccia pop-up wouldn't go bankrupt. What would you do? You would invest irrationally into Amazon and your friend's pop-up. Wild example, I know, but this basically misprices the risk of home ownership, driving more investment into the space than would be warranted in a rational market. But Canada kept going with government programs. They introduced the FHSA and HBP, which are investment savings accounts that are tax shielded so that people can save to buy a home. These sound nice on paper, but even the CMHC said that these demand-side subsidies only raise the price of homes. Think about it, you basically created a carve-out that allows homebuyers to save more money to afford homes that are otherwise unaffordable. This simply keeps up the charade. But wait, there is more. Canada softened mortgage renewal requirements and stress tests. Simply put, they lowered the bar to get loans. Think about that. The government introduced more risk into a system that they ultimately backstop. And when I say they, I mean the taxpayer. But you see, this all makes perfect sense. Like I said before, the goal of a politician is to get elected, and most citizens don't have a clue on what's going on. If you can show voters home price go high and economy go up, you've sealed your fate. I mean, look at this video of Canada's housing minister basically saying home prices can't come down.
And delivering that.
Need to go down.
No, I think that we need to deliver more supply.
Or Trump saying the same.
Existing housing, people that own their homes, we're going to keep them wealthy. We're going to keep those prices up.
Think about that. Both the left and the right won't let home prices come down. This is not a partisan issue. Instead, they discuss the idea of affordable housing, which makes no sense. How can you create affordable housing when the land you are buying to build housing is inherently unaffordable? But eventually, the pressure becomes too much, and nothing makes sense anymore. Prices are so damn high that not even Jeff Bezos can afford a house. Well, maybe he can, but you get the point. What happens next is why this problem will never go away. Okay, we have talked a lot about sins. Daddy government wanting to meddle, taxing productive work, foreign buyers, and more. But it all started with the most deadly sin of them all. Housing is an investment. If this house of cards is built under the notion that your home is an investment, what does that mean for an economy? It means that the vast majority of household wealth is real estate. Also means that real estate adjacent activities are often the largest contributors to an economy. Cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Melbourne, Sydney, and others are heavily tilted toward the housing market. Each of these cities derives around 20% of their direct GDP from housing-related activities. If prices collapse, then the ripple effects are going to be catastrophic. This leads to the last sin, the government bailout. The craziest example of this is the Japanese financial crisis, which we detailed a bit in our Oscar-nominated documentary link below. Just joking, don't get mad at me. When Japan's real estate bubble burst, land values, which are the bedrock of the country's bank collateral, crashed by up to 80%, leaving the entire financial system insolvent. To prevent a total collapse, the government injected 60 trillion yen to buy up toxic real estate debt and nationalize failing banks, effectively socializing the losses for private investors. This intervention saved the system from immediate death, but created zombie companies and triggered the lost decade of economic stagnation. And we are starting to see grumblings of this in other countries. The US bailed out banks in the GFC. Yeah, we know it's not exactly the same, but similar enough. Canada is purchasing $30 billion in Canada mortgage bonds to inject liquidity and keep mortgage rates artificially suppressed. And on a smaller scale, Ontario is using taxpayer money to buy up real estate. I mean, this is insane. You might think these are good ideas, but this is no different than putting polysporin and a band-aid on a gunshot wound. Eventually, no amount of polysporin will work. And unfortunately, the bleeding won't impact homeowners today. They'll be fine. It will simply destroy the future of the young. This is the broader point. These housing sins won't matter for older people. These sins exist to make their lives easier, but you see, nothing is without trade-offs. These trade-offs will directly impact you. Our viewers are generally 20 to 40 years of age. You are the exact people that these sins will destroy. But often you are the exact people who seem to vote without thinking about this at all. Listen, we talk to a lot of young voters, and not a single person we have ever spoken with has pointed out these issues. Instead, they often blame greedy developers. They often blame a lack of affordable housing development. Simple talking points that politicians continue to repeat to get your vote. This isn't the issue. The issue is a system that is flawed at its core. Housing is an investment, so we must keep prices high, so we must build less housing to keep prices high, so we must lower housing taxes to make it affordable for me to own an expensive home, so we must tax workers to provide services that my taxes don't cover, so we must bring in foreign capital because local people can't afford homes, so we must bring in government programs that artificially prop up homes, so we must bail me out because if you don't, home prices will fall, and that cannot happen. Yes, Grand Regent Landlord, in the immortal words of Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to 220. If you really like this video, check out our Discord community. It's free. We actually hang out there and debate. See ya!